Welcome back to Locked On Women's Basketball. You're listening to episode 11 of our WNBA Retrospect Scouting Series, a historical look back at the greatest draft prospects in league history. Today we'll discuss Candace Parker, a player who was way ahead of her time in the positionless basketball movement out of Tennessee. We'll also cover defensive ace Sylvia Fowles out of LSU. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
Ogunbowale for the win.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball.
Welcome. You are Locked On Women's Basketball. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. My name is Hunter Cruse, and I'm your Saturday host, covering the WNBA draft and prospect scouting. I'm joined by my co-hosts M. Adler and Lincoln Shafer. M covers the WNBA and college ball out of the greater New York market, focusing on player development and trends within the game. Lincoln is our biomechanics guru. You can follow him on Twitter at Dovinia_. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more right now. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I said, our conversation subject today is Tennessee's Candace Parker. So let's take you back to 2008. Parker was without a doubt the most hyped prospect to enter the WNBA in league history. Off back-to-back national championships under Pat Summitt, she was a two-time SEC Player of the Year winner, a three-time APL American, and a one-time Naismith Award winner in her three collegiate seasons. Candace Parker was just a generational prospect, plain and simple. So for you, M, starting it off, what is one of those skills that you see with Parker that you just don't usually see with other prospects?
What you don't usually see with other prospects in the entirety of any college basketball is the ability to take a team that has really at best one genuine other professional player and win back-to-back national championships. Her best teammate from a WNBA from a scoring perspective in the 2 years that she won a natty, again, she was at Tennessee for 3 years, won a natty in the last two. Her best offensive teammate in those 2 years was Sydney Spencer. The only long-term WNBA teammate she had on those teams was, I'm going to mispronounce the last name here, Nikki Anakase, something like that, who was at just a backup center. She won back-to-back national championships. Like this is one of the easiest things we could ever do in terms of a scout here. I think the biggest thing to me is the fact that she moves and plays and scores like someone who is maybe 5'11" or 6 foot and has the best sort of ranginess and lateral athleticism that you will ever see out of a guard or a wing. And, this is trite. Everyone calls her a point guard in a big body. It's kind of ridiculous just to watch what that looks like, because she's not just someone, she's not like early career Anthony Davis where you have the guard skills at that height. But you're giving up the ability to create out of the post. No, she's doing all of it. It's ridiculous.
And with Candace's game, just a basketball genius, plain and simple, from watching her film. One thing that was kind of common for me, because I kind of look at box scores before I watch the game, just to kind of see, just kind of looking at the
box
trend of the game.
Stat watcher.
So whenever I looked at these box scores, I would see one assist, and then I would backtrack that after I watched the game, and I'm like, okay, she had one assist, but some of her teammates were just blowing some open layups. Like they would immediately double sometimes. Candace makes some beautiful reads the backline defense perfectly, makes the perfect read to the cutter or a 3-point shooter, miss a three, miss a layup. And that's whenever you combine that with her handle too. And what she could do, not even just stationary, but being able to create
handle.
Her handles. sometimes she would just show off her handle and just for fun. Like, it wouldn't even go anywhere, but she just kind of does it. I clipped one play of that. It was just like, I'm just going to throw it in this highlight film just because it's cool. Not that it really resulted in anything. But what about you, Lincoln? What did you see on your scout?
Yeah, the handle is the first thing that really stood out to me. It's so advanced for someone who's a big. She really does embody the thing that trite commentators love to say, that this player can play 1 through 5, but she really is. She's bringing the ball up the court. She's running the offense. She's one of the most impressive college like mid-range, mid-post scorers I've seen. She can play defense. She's just the embodiment of a complete basketball player. My first note was just wow, because it's hilarious to watch her play basketball because she's so far ahead of what everyone else on the court is doing. It's so impressive.
Tennessee literally listed her as guard/forward/center. That's never happened ever at any other player, at least as far as I've seen in the history of college basketball. And you look at that and you're like, oh, that's a little trait. You watch her freshman year, she was playing the offensive 2. She was playing the 2 on offense. The next year she plays the 4, and when Nikki sits a lot, she plays the 5. Same thing for the most part her senior year, although she does flex to the 3 a bunch. Because Pat Summit, I will save my takes for another occasion. There is something that I said, I think, earlier on this podcast when we were talking about holds clot and catchings, which was just how far ahead Gino had UConn playing, just relative to how they elevated their baseline and the ceiling that they would be able to reach within their level of play. And honestly, Candace is kind of the exception that proves the rule, in that once Gino started featuring guards in his offense as like big creators, once he let Sue Bird do what she did, it was the first player to ever do that. Once he let Diana Taurasi just become the engine of the offense, just bombing threes, first player to do that. The only way that Pat Summit was able to get Tennessee to a level where he win a national championship again was again because she, was just completely unable to get that level of guard play, was getting the best point guard in the country. She just happened to be 6'4" and named Candace Parker.
Yeah, she's good at everything. There's nothing that she can't do. Like, my only negative note is that she can be a little bit reckless on closeouts, but that's a super easy fix. And
not only that,
I'd
her
rather
lateral quickness and her hip mobility is so insane. She's so fluid on both ends. It doesn't matter.
I'd rather have somebody who's a little bit too aggressive defensively than someone who you can't get to play defense.
For sure. I would say literally. Oh, sorry, Hunter, go ahead.
The one thing I would say was probably the shooting from 3. If you want to kind of nitpick there, she didn't really shoot under 1 attempt in each of her 3 college seasons. She never shot. She shot 25%, 33%, and then 27%. So you saw the flashes, but still, that was probably the one thing. Also, maybe you look at the athleticism, maybe just traditional athleticism. I think she kind of provides athleticism in so many other ways. Just the vertical pop in that aspect, I think it's also something I noticed as well. But I don't think it mattered, though.
I was going to say, I think she's not a vertical rim protector in the same way.
Yeah.
But she's so good laterally.
If you're nitpicking,
yeah, exactly. You're not going to be you're probably not playing her at the 5 anyway, especially not that day. So What does it matter? On your point about the 3-point thing, I think the only comment, even with the closeouts, I didn't really notice that as much. The only thing that I looked at that was like, we don't love this too much, and I found this incredibly coachable anyway, was she just took a bunch of long 2s, and she's so good, physically, just sweating her shoulders. She's so insane off the dribble on her fadeaways, on her turnarounds, on her just pull-ups that I understand why she's doing it. And we'll get into this when we talk about her WNBA career, but if there's one criticism, it's that. And if you have the right kind of coach, they can just get you to stop doing that thing.
Yeah, so after the break, we'll get into our scouting grades on Parker, and we'll also talk about Sylvia Fowles and later discuss how their pro careers unfolded. Football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now you can bet on a Super Bowl winner and you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. You just pick any team to win the Super Bowl and get bonus bets for every victory. Use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Welcome back. I'm your host, Hunter Cruse, and thanks for joining us. Let's get back into our scouting grades on both Parker and Fowles, solely based on the film we watched from them pre-WNBA, taking into account the current state of the league rather than emphasis on current WNBA philosophies, team building, schematics you'll see nowadays. But first, for those unfamiliar, we use a baseball-like 20/80 scouting scale of 40 is an average WNBA contributor, which we're probably not going to see of the rest of the series. 45 is a top-end backup, 50 is your average starter, 55 is an above-average starter, 60 is an all-star caliber player, 70 is an all-WNBA caliber player, and 80 is reserved for your MVP candidates, basically first-team perennial all-WNBA players. So now that we got that out of the way, one thing we'll talk about is how good of a prospect Candace Parker was. But behind her was another prospect who probably ends up top 10 on our list, spoilers, at the end of the series. And for you, Lincoln, talk about Sylvia Fowles for us and where she falls with your grade.
Yeah, with Sylvia Fowles, she's an incredibly high level prospect, but in a very different way from Candace Parker. Candace, you get the I'm good at everything, I have no weaknesses. And Sylvia Fowles is I'm really good at these two specific things, but you can't stop me from doing them, so it doesn't matter that I can't do the other stuff. She's the best lob threat that we've watched out of any of these prospects we have. She's an absolute premier paint protector. Like the timing on her blocks and contests in the paint are really great. She has so many small ways that she creates advantages. The number one way being that she's just so good at sealing smaller defenders. She's putting somebody on her back hip and putting her arm up, and it's 2 points. There's nothing you can do to stop it. As long as there's even a fine pass, it's 2 points. She's just incredibly well positioned all the time. She's taller than everybody on the court most of the time, and she has great hands on both ends and great feet too. And it's another player who's very fun to watch.
And honestly, I would say you're kind of underselling her defense. She's not like a premier paint defender. She's the greatest paint defender that you can possibly imagine, and then a little bit better than that, frankly. Like the starting off at like the baseline, all the athletic features that you expect. She has a big frame, she has a very long wingspan, and really big hands. When she was at LSU, she came up to measured up to 6'5", I believe. Later in Minnesota, she'd be listed 6'6", but don't quote me on that. We don't exactly know what her wingspan was, but I saw it reported somewhere, a little questionably, as 7'1", which would kind of make sense. And the thing about her for that frame, she's big and she's bulky and uses that size really well to bang it down low. She's excellent preventing post positioning and getting in the way of post scorers with that ability. But the thing is, it takes just like a beat or two watching her before you realize she doesn't move like she's that big at all. Her core rotational flexibility and her hip mobility is absolutely unreal for someone of that, for anyone really, but especially someone of that size. And she just has this perfect, preternatural understanding of angles and positioning and just where to be in terms of help, recovery timing, even defending in space. Frankly, we don't have a lot of examples just because of the time it was for basketball of her, playing drop, playing at the level, really defending pick and rolls in any way. But you can see her when she has to do these sort of emergency switches, cover on the backside. It's insane how well she's able to cover, just like even up to like the 2 position in space. I don't know that there's literally anything on the defensive end that you want or even expect out of a backline defender that she wasn't essentially perfect at. And then the offensive end, again, you have that size, you have that hip flexibility. And like Lincoln said, even people her own size, she's just insane about being able to seal them. And again, with the size, she has unbelievable touch. She is, for a very good reason, easily the WNBA career leader in scoring efficiency, again, by a good margin, and with a heck of a lot more attempts than the rest of the people close to her on that list. It's just so many weapons that she has against you. As a ridiculous play finisher, she really doesn't do anything in terms of creating in the post, but it doesn't matter because as a defender, you have to get lucky on so many. You have to get lucky every single way that you try to defend her, and she only has to get lucky once, and that's a bucket.
Yeah, she's one of the highest floor prospects, I think, in this series. We talk about watching her. I don't really see an outcome where she is worse than an all-star, honestly. Like, that's kind of like the base I see for her, and that's kind of why I give her like a 70. I think she's just a solid 70 for me. What about y'all?
No doubt about it.
Both in agreement here. Okay, that is actually
Yes.
probably like one of the that is probably
Yeah,
one of the very
I
few
have
ones that we
70.
all have the same. Yeah, just kind of like
Yeah,
the
and-
easiest scout I think we have in this series so far, if not the whole.
Yeah, I think pretty easily. I think I had a little bit of internal back and forth about where to go with that, but that's honestly, again, just because like she basically creates nothing on the offensive end, but she finishes
It doesn't
everything,
matter.
and it doesn't matter.
Such a
So
good
like how high
finisher.
exactly. It was essentially, do I go 7 or do I go 8? And I was like, I need a little more creation for like a full 8.
Right.
But even then, like we'll get to the WNBA career, but we see a little more offensive skill when we get to someone who runs an offense.
And these are both premier athletes as well as being bigger and stronger
Absolutely.
and faster than a lot of people. They both dunked in college in games, and they both just dominated everywhere they went. And that's why I think we probably all have the same grade on Canvas too. You're watching her, and it really makes sense that she won an MVP 4 months after she finished college. Like, you can see that. That's not something that I say about any other prospect, really. Like, you're just like, yeah, this is an MVP right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are very few prospects that we go through on this list where I looked at them at least and said, I don't want to watch them in college anymore. They have no business being here. Candace, maybe she needed a couple months at Tennessee, but other than that, she would have been one of the best players in the W at the age of 19. I frankly don't think we could say that about anyone we've done so far, with the exception of Diana Taurasi, and that was just because it doesn't matter.
Maybe LJ. Maybe LJ.
Yeah, the closest is LJ, I think.
LJ didn't even go to
playing-
college, so I'm calling an exception on that one.
But she was hooping against Team USA at 19.
yeah.
Oh, I agree. And she made it to the league at 19. That's the beauty of international drafts. But like, even with Moan, even with Catch, we're gonna get to players in the next few weeks who, and that's the funny thing, is that the longer this series goes on, the more you get to players who, once they get into the W, it takes some time to adjust. Not because prospects get worse. In fact, the prospects are getting better as we go through the series. But it's because the league gets so much exponentially better just as a baseline. And that's what, and like, so when Syl enters the league, already an elite defender, but still has to relearn a little bit in terms of timing, and just has to learn about picking her spots and avoiding fouls, no pun intended, on both offense and defense. On offense, especially that, just picking her spots and knowing when to roll and knowing when to seal. She gets in trouble with that in her first couple of years. Candace doesn't. She runs an MVP. I gave her the same grade I gave LJ. It's an 8+. There's nothing to do with this. She breaks the scale. There's no universe in which Candace gets.
What's the point of the scale? What's the point of the scale?
Without a debilitating injury, there's no universe in which Candace doesn't win multiple MVPs.
Yeah, another one of my notes, it just says that Candace is basketball nirvana. It doesn't get better than Candace Parker.
Nope.
It's as good as it gets.
No, I didn't even know if anyone was going to mention her score because I feel like it was just kind of implied from how you guys started talking about her.
It's up there.
We gotta tie it back. We gotta tie it back in for the listeners. There's a reason why Syl is, one of the easiest stats we've ever done, and bang on all multi-time all WNBA player, and also why none of us thought for a second she should have gone number one.
Yeah.
Right. And after the break, we'll get into how both of their careers unfolded in the W, and we'll also get into some comps, which is always fun. The Jace case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use. Jace Medical is simple. You go online, fill out a form, and then you get a prescription life-saving medications right to your door. The Jace case gives you peace of mind that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jace case makes sure you have the medication in hand. Get ongoing care from your physicians on any treatment-related questions. Doctor created, doctor recommended. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical Plus. An additional $20 off by using code LOCKEDON at checkout on jacemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com using code LOCKEDON for an additional 20% off. All right, so kicking it off with our comp section here. Who do you guys want to start with first? Should we go to Candace? I'll give it to you first, then, Lincoln. What do you got?
Lincoln, you remuted yourself. In the meanwhile, I'll take this opportunity to say I only had one comp for either of them, mostly because I'm unoriginal. And for me, Candace is like, what if we took Anthony Davis and we took LeBron James and we just smashed them together? I don't have a WNBA comp for Candace just because there isn't. Like, what if Emily Ensler was like a killer 2-point shooter and like had an insane fadeaway? I don't know.
Okay. There's not really a comparison point for Candace Parker because she's that good. Like, the closest is to look at LeBron James and like the hype that he came with in the NBA.
I was stealing my
right, but there's not really. She's Candace. You can't compare her to anything. She's too good. Syl is a bit more of an archetype that we've seen before. And I think the closest comparison that I could think of for her was Dwight Howard, who had the same kind of physical, imposing presence defensively and lob catching and seals without really a lot of self-creation in the post, which was still good enough to lead a team to the finals and win multiple defensive players of the year. That's probably the
greatest. He's probably the greatest like individual defender of the past 15 years. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and Syl is the same level of defender and the same level of finisher. And that's pretty much my only comparisons for these two. There's no they're unique players that are just so good.
And then first with Candace, what did you see from her WNBA tape? Like you said, though, she entered the league immediately MVP 4 months later. What did everything check out for you?
Of all time, that it's probably not close. It's probably not close. I don't care about your takes. It's Candace Parker. It's impossible to say that it's not Candace if you go back and like actually watch her from her prime. The things she does from 2008 to basically 2012, even 2013. And again, I'm not saying that her prime is limited to her first 5 seasons, but she was the greatest like transition threat in league history. I have 12 clips on my computer just from like 2010 to 2012 of her going coast to coast and breaking 3 ankles on the way there and then hitting an and one. She was one of the league's best playmakers, top 3-4 playmaker for most of her career. Despite, again, playing the 4 or the 5 sometimes, there's something interesting about the way her career develops in terms of being elite, winning 2 MVPs, obviously, coming in top 3, top 5 in a whole bunch of other races, as was well deserved. But there's something a little funny with her career, to be quite honest, with I think 2 key flaws to it. I mentioned the mid-range shooting before. She has taken so many long twos in her career. Completely, like, I don't want to say completely unnecessary. She was really good at it. Her true shootings were still like 580, 590 for most of her career on big usage for a reason. But you're playing under these coaches who just aren't telling her to shoot a bunch of threes when they really should be, or not even a bunch of threes, but just take those 14-footers and, for the love of God, turn them into like 8-footers. She can. She's physically imposing, but she's just so dominant that she doesn't, and it doesn't matter because she's so good at them. It's kind of the difference again between ranking like in the 80th percentile in scoring efficiency and like the 90th, which is important when we're talking about, is she like the greatest player of all time or like the 4th greatest player of all time? I think also the reason why she basically had a title and why she had to wait all the way until 2016 for the title with LA is there's something interesting when she gets to LA. She's playing with Lisa, obviously. Lisa Leslie retires soon thereafter, but there's this interesting thing where her front court partners for the first few years of her prime are Tina Thompson, who we talked about before, is probably the greatest like pure scoring stretch option in WNBA history, just in terms of forward play, and also for the most part, Alicia Milton-Jones, who was really kind of ahead of her time as like a utility big wing. Those two probably would not play together, play alongside each other in today's game, but they did back then. And for that time, you're playing 3 players, those 2 and Candace, who are your front court. Alicia Milton-Jones is a little more perimeter-oriented than most threes at the time. And not only that, none of these players are traditional 5s or even like traditional rim protectors. And it works quite well, frankly. They just had limitations in other ways. There were defensive issues with that trio, as well as the guard play. Chrissy Tolliver doesn't come into her own until 2012. Teacher isn't contributing much, frankly. We've been over this in terms of her career. It's not until you get into the mid-2010s where they stop screwing around. They stop making Candace play like 2/3 of her minutes next to Jontel Lavender. I think it's 2012 or 2013, Nneka Ogwumike has to play a 3. You got Candace Parker. Don't do that. When you get to 2016, 2017, even 2018, just in spite of Derek Fisher, and I'm reluctant to praise Brian Adler, but at least as a coach, he's always excellent getting out of his own way and just letting his players be their best. That's what you see, I think, in the mid to late 2010s. Is really like, what can we do when we have Christy Tolliver, Nneka Ogwumike, Candace Parker? These players are all sort of revolutionaries in their own specific ways. And then, next thing you have Chelsea Gray and Olivia Beard. So, like, what can we say? That's just 5 Hall of Famers. But again, that's when you really see Candace stopping so limited by the talent, by the lineups around her. And unfortunately, by then, she's she basically picks up an injury like every year from like 2013 through 2016. And you see the athleticism slowly goes down a little bit, but that's still almost, you get from that period what you wanted from the earlier part of her career. And it's one of the reasons why, again, greatest player of all time. Sorry for the long rant. She's had a very interesting career from a coaching perspective.
And rightly deserved, too. So with Syl, though, on the other hand, a unique case where she entered the league, 4th year, she won Defensive Player of the Year, right? She won her last Defensive Player of the Year 10 years later in like her mid-30s. So one thing we talked about with our scout was like her defense or athleticism. That didn't really matter as her career translated. Like can you explain that more to the listeners, and also Lincoln, at just how her sustained defensive success kind of just developed? Because we see with a lot of players, they get in their 30s, their defense takes a notch down. And she really was never not an all defense type player, first team at that.
That's the thing about her positioning, about her lateral ability, and about her hip mobility, is those things, they're all going to get worse with age, obviously. But the cerebral understanding of the game and how that connects to the way she moves her joints and moves her bones, and the length never gets worse. So, she might not be hitting things as quickly as she used to, but it's still, how are you getting around that wingspan, especially when it moves that quickly? And as the game spaces out, she turns out, who could have guessed this one was coming, to be a perfect drop defender. Unfortunately, multiple coaches of the Chicago Sky didn't learn that and played her in a hedge screen for some ridiculous reason. And it basically, they failed their players in other ways too, but they completely misused it. It was kind of insane to watch Sylvia Fowles, who the greatest paint protector of all time, playing in a hedge screen for no good reason. But she gets out of Chicago despite, she wins, I think, 2 Defensive Players of the Year while in Chicago, while playing this mind-numbingly stupid scheme. And, she is also covering up for really, really bad teammates from the defensive end. She's playing with Sloot, she's playing with Quigley, she's playing with BDD, who doesn't become a decent defender until basically the year of our Lord 2019 or 2021. She's playing with Jessica Breland. She's playing with Epiphany Prince. I love most of those players. They're all terrible defenders at best. She gets to Minnesota, and for as good as Minnesota was, we talked about Moan last week, as good as those 2010s Lynx dynasties were at putting the ball in the hoop, their defense was ridiculous. You're next to probably the greatest most switchable wing defender of all time in Maya. You're next to Moan, who's shockingly good as a defender. Next to Rebecca Brunson, who's probably your greatest traditional cleanup artist at the 4. And it's impossible to deal with that. And again, even as all those players retire, and she's in her mid-30s, and the people next to you, and she's once again dealing with the Candace issue that we talked about before, where you have Demirs Dantes and Nafisa Collier starting with Sylvia Fowles. Doesn't matter. She's just getting what she wants in the paint on both ends. And I think the real key, which I don't have enough time to do justice for, but the reason she was so dang good, especially in offense in the W with her limitation, it turns out she is an elite screen roller.
Yeah, she's just with Syl. You can't teach positioning. Well, you can teach positioning, but she has such an incredibly innate understanding of positioning that you really can't teach. She's so good at being in the right spot all the time, and that obviously translates to her WNBA career. She's also shooting 100% from 3 for her entire career, 1 for 1 with one make in 2010. But I mean, evidence says greatest defender of all time, greatest shooter of all time. And I rest my case.
And if she's not the greatest defender of all time, the greatest defender of all time in that case is Tamika Catchings, who played a less valuable position. No offense to Catchings, incredible talent, but played a less pretty much by definition. So it tells us at least the most valuable defender of all time. And I think in terms of the key, the real thing connecting these 2 players and why they're so good at so many things, and especially into the advanced age. I mean, hell, Candace finished top 5 in MVP voting, I think it was last year. One thing that we're figuring out, especially as we go through this series, is the biggest difference between a multi-time All-Star and a perennial number 1 or number 2 in a title team. It's processing speed and processing ability. You can teach a heck of a lot of stuff if you're good enough at it, which most WNBA coaches and front offices throughout history really just aren't even close to being good at. Can't teach processing speed. You can give people situations where processing speed is played up and enhanced, but that is why you see what you see with so many of these players.
We talked about 2 of the greatest ever on this episode. Back next week, we'll discuss Maya Moore. But first, to recap this episode, our consensus scouting grade on Parker was an 80, but like Em said, she breaks the scale. And our consensus scouting grade on Fowles was a 70, just a really solid 70 there. But yeah, thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Join the team at next week for continued WNBA playoff coverage and women's basketball as a whole. Have a great weekend, everyone.